Today is Thursday, December 12th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. And I'd like to talk to anyone who's either involved in a private school or who is interested in starting a private school, whether you're an individual or whether you're a member of a school board, or whether you're a teacher in an existing school. If you have an interest in leading or developing a classical Catholic school, I'd like to share some practical advice with you. I've been working in education as a classicist since 2000 full time. So 24 years I've been doing this full time. And what I see most schools doing is the same thing that all other schools are doing. And we have a tendency as individuals to think that when we do the same thing that other people are doing, it's going to be different because it's us doing it. So most of the time when we hear talk about reforming schools or starting new schools or starting classical schools or building better schools or even homeschooling, it's usually people who have no plans but to do the same things that are already being done, who imagine that because they're the ones doing it, the outcomes are going to be different, and the outcomes are usually not different. And it's pretty easy to understand why. Now, what I'd like to say is you may look at my career and my work and say, with all of your knowledge and experience in education, why don't you start a brick and mortar school? Why don't you actually organize private schools? Why don't you develop like a franchise of classical liberal arts academy schools? And I'll answer that very easily. In 2013, I did start a private school, but as I got into the work of developing that school, I realized that the real core work that was needed for a reform in education was not going to be provided by working to establish an individual school. And I'd like to talk about this key issue. What is really needed for a reform in education? What's really needed for us to start a new movement of independent Catholic schools that are classical Catholic schools, not fake classical schools, but real, authentic, classical Catholic schools that could develop and spread in 1,000 different places? What's really necessary for the stability of a program, for the integrity of a program, for the excellence of an academic program? What's really necessary? Because this is what no schools are focused on, and it's why nothing changes. And it was the realization that this was needed which led me 4 years after I started my school to say, you know what, this is not going to work because something deeper and more fundamental needs to be developed first. And what that is the entire infrastructure, the intellectual and academic infrastructure of the school mind, as it were, the school soul, not the infrastructure of facilities, not faculty, not collections of books or study materials, but the entire system that provides the real soul and culture of a school movement. And what I've devoted myself to is building the soul of a real classical Catholic school movement that might develop. It's already in thousands of home schools, but it might develop in brick and mortar schools in the future. And I'm not ruling out whether I would be involved in those schools, but I'm approaching 50 years old this upcoming year. And to be perfectly honest, I would be content in my life to ride into the sunset at this point with the online curriculum development work that I've already been doing as my life's work and contribution. But if there were groups who were interested in organizing schools, even individuals who had the humility and patience necessary to understand and actually execute a plan for the development of a local school, I would be willing to help as much as I can. But if this core need is not embraced, it's just a waste of time. It's going to be a waste of everyone's time. It's going to be a waste of money. It's never really going to make a difference at all. And I've got no interest in the fake classical school movement, in the endless startup of private schools that never make any difference in the long run. For me, it's all or nothing, which is why I started the Classical Liberal Arts Academy in the first place. Now, I'd like you to think about what schools normally do, what the problem is with private schools, why they don't work. The entire plan for a private school is the problem of the private school because honestly, there is no plan for the success of a school. There's no plan. That's the problem with the plan. And I'll give you some, I'll give you an example from my own history as a teacher, my own experience as a teacher. I worked for a very prestigious Christian school here in Charlotte, where I was in charge of the classics department, as it were. All the classics courses were mine. I taught all the courses, I developed the courses, I decided what was done in the courses, and it was greatly successful. When I was hired, there were 12 students studying Latin, and by the end of my first year, there were 170 students studying Latin. It grew and it was very popular, and that's just the Latin courses. My rhetoric and debate courses were the most popular courses. Kids would actually skip, I'm talking about seniors in high school, they would actually skip lunch and study hall periods. Even seniors who had early dismissal privileges would stay for my last period courses to sit in on our debates and lessons in rhetoric because they were so rich and helpful, not because anything was special about what I was doing, but because the content itself is so valuable, and the kids perceived that and sought it out. But what happened was I was required, like all the other teachers, to attend the faculty meetings and talk about all of the different plans and initiatives that the school leadership was interested in. And one of the plans that they had was they wanted to develop a complete curriculum map for the school's curriculum. In other words, the school was running this massive private school that had been around for 50 plus years. This school was running, charging around $18,000 per year for tuition, just millions and millions of dollars, huge faculty, hundreds and hundreds of students, running with no curriculum map. In other words, there was no real knowledge of what was being taught, when it was being taught, how it was being taught. There was no actual school standard in terms of instructional quality, student mastery, assessment, etc. The school was really just a front for a collection of teachers who were hired and then given freedom to develop and teach and assess their own courses. And that's how the school worked. And I would argue that's how most schools work. The administrators of the schools, the board members, they don't do the work of administrators and board members. They just play like public speaker at school events, and maybe they're involved in fundraising. but they don't actually do the difficult work of a school administrator, which is to actually build the mind of the school itself, build the culture, build the soul of the school. The schools don't have souls, as it were. They're just collections of individual workers who gather together in a facility. Maybe they've got some extracurriculars that give some outside of the classroom personality to the school. Maybe they have some school spirit, as it were, but that's not the spirit or soul of a school. And most schools, I would say almost all schools, have no real soul. They have no real mind in the school because the administrators and the board members don't do what they're supposed to be doing. They leave it for others. They basically leave it for teachers to do. And teachers, the problem with this whole idea is that teachers come and go. Turnover in schools is something like 30%. That means that every year, approximately 1/3 of the faculty is changed. Teachers leave, new teachers come in. So it's like a river. You know, back in ancient times, philosophers were mesmerized by thoughts about a river because it led to a question about the existence of things. Like, what is a thing? Like, think about a river. If we talk about the Mississippi River, we have a snapshot in our mind of this massive body of water that's flowing from the north central United States down into the Gulf of Mexico. And we can all have a sort of a stationary snapshot image of the Mississippi River, or an image on a map of the Mississippi River. But the Mississippi River is really a body of water that's made up of particles of water that are constantly moving. Water is constantly entering the so-called Mississippi River, and water is constantly leaving this Mississippi River. So if we were to take a sample of the water on any 2 days, the water would be completely different. It's not the same water, and yet it's given a name. It's called the Mississippi River, as if it's the same, as if it's a swimming pool that contains the same water day in and day out. This is how most schools are. We look at a school, the school's got a name, the school's got maybe a mascot. We think of the school as this stationary thing. We imagine the school to be something that it actually is not. But with the teacher turnover, it's more like a river. It's this constantly changing thing that the administration works to cover up and give a stationary, stable appearance, primarily to the parents, so that they happily pay their tuition bill. But the whole nature of the school, if you think about it, if you think how poorly designed the private school is, you've got the work of the school really left to the teachers, which is a constantly changing body of individuals. So the quality of the educational program is entirely dependent upon the quality of the faculty members, and yet the faculty members are constantly changing. Usually, you've got very talented young men and women who are the good teachers, and they come in and they teach for a few years, usually as they start their careers, as they get out of college and get started in their full-time work. They work in education for a few years, and everyone can tell that these individuals are very talented, they're very skilled, very hardworking, very capable, and they're probably going to do something greater than teaching. Not that teaching is anything but the most important work that there is, but there's just more to be done. I remember when I was first hired, there was an old retired Air Force science teacher at the school I worked at, and one day I was sitting in the faculty lounge during one of my break periods, and he came in and looked at me and said, "When are you going to get a real job? Or when are you going to get your real job? What are you going to do when you grow up?" He was joking, but it was obvious that I wasn't going to be a high school Latin and literature teacher very long. But for me, that's where my career started. And for many private schools, they have talented young men and women just out of college, and the teaching job is their first job. They give an appearance that the school is going to be this highly intellectual, high achieving institution, but they're going to be gone within a couple of years. The schools put all of the pressure on the teachers, and yet the private schools pay teachers very poorly. If you look at a picture, I often do this, go to a private school website and look at pictures of their faculty members, and you'll see a crew of people who look like they're struggling financially, because they are. Private schools really don't have a plan for what they're doing. They just really take advantage of the generosity of usually Christian people who want to do good, who want to help children, and who take these jobs thinking it's some sort of spiritual service or sacrifice that they're making for Christian education, when in fact it's just a very poorly conceived plan for a school. But this is how the private school works. It's always underfunded unless tuition is extraordinary and it's a wealthy area. It's always underfunded. If you look at pictures, photo galleries from the school, you can just see how cheap things look. The students don't look like they're well cared for. The classrooms look like they're barely furnished. The teachers look like they're struggling to make ends meet. You can just see and feel the lack of resources that are present in the school. And I'm not criticizing the schools, because I think it's impossible to actually fund the schools as they're run. I think that the plan is flawed. Really, there's no plan at all. And what we see are the consequences of that lack of management, that lack of leadership from the school board and from the administration, because they have a plan that, like I said, isn't a plan. Getting back to the school I worked at, the headmaster of the school came into a faculty meeting one day and told us that we were going to begin a curriculum mapping initiative in which we were all in our spare time. All of the teachers were basically going to log and fill out all of the information relating to the courses they teach, the textbooks they use, the topics they cover, the scope and sequence of their courses, on and on, all of this stuff. We were going to enter all of this into this software system and create a complete curriculum map for our school. That was the genius plan of the administration, to ask the teachers in their spare time to develop a curriculum map for the entire school. And I remember, as the headmaster was explaining this initiative, I looked at one of my colleagues, a friend of mine, and I whispered to him and I said, "This is never going to happen. This is never going to happen. The teachers are going to get started. They're going to start doing this curriculum map. Half of them are going to leave at the end of the year. It's going to be a giant mess, and then it's just going to quietly be canceled. Because this school doesn't have a curriculum map because of the way the school is run, and it's going to continue to have no curriculum map." And I told my friend, I'm not even going to work on it. I'm going to call bluff and gamble on the fact that this initiative is going to disappear in a few months. And I was right. It disappeared a few faculty meetings later. The headmaster stood up in front of all the teachers and apologized and told us that the curriculum map project was not going to be continued. And I winked at my colleague. And that's how private schooling works. It's a lot of good intentions with no realistic planning or leadership to get anything done, because the leaders have sort of a half-invested, half-interested commitment to the school, and they really don't know what they're doing. They really don't have the resources or the knowledge or the experience to be what they want to pretend themselves to be. So as I was working at that school, that's when my ideas about the Classical Liberal Arts Academy started to come together, because I could see what was wrong with the school. I could see why the schools were so ineffective. I could see that no matter how much money, and I'm talking millions and millions of dollars, was poured into the school through fundraising every year, millions and millions of dollars in tuition collected from parents every year, parents writing checks for everything, as generous as they could be, but still never getting a quality education for their children. Certainly nothing that looks anything like a historic Christian education. And I thought to myself of that curriculum map experience, and I said, this is the real core problem with modern Christian education. There's no map, there's no plan, there's no real culture for this school. The school has no soul. There is no school mind, and the school mind is really the mind of its administrator. The school mind is really the mind of its headmaster. If we look back through history at great schools that were started, we normally find that the school was started by a great individual, and that individual was the personification of what the school was. That founder's soul was the soul of the school, and it gave the school identity, it gave the school a mission, gave the school clear standards, established policies and procedures for the school, and everyone could look back and think of the founder and say, the goal of our school is to be like the founder, to fulfill the mission and intentions and spirit of our founder. If we look to religious communities in the church, we see this same phenomenon. If we look to the church itself, we see this same phenomenon. We see our Lord as the head of the church, but not just the head of the church. We see him as the soul and life and personification of everything that the church aspires to be. If we ever have to sit and think about what we should do in the church, what the church should be or do, what do? We just go back and think about Jesus, the founder of the church. To be like him is the mission of the church. To be like Saint Dominic is the mission of the Dominican order. To be like Saint Francis is the mission and rule of the Franciscan order. And for a school really needs to have a founder and a soul that everyone can identify with, and there are hardly any schools that have such an arrangement. And it's why the schools really don't have any influence or impact, because they're really not substantial. They really don't have an identity or a purpose, as hard as they may try to generate something artificially. They just can't break through the soil, as it were. So what I did in 2008 was I established the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and the mission of the Academy is to research, restore, publish, and teach the classical liberal arts. And notice how it starts. It starts to research, to restore, to publish, and teach the classical liberal arts. There was so much work that was needed to be done, which modern schools don't take the time to do. The school boards don't do it. The school administrators don't do it. They just pretend that they're just going to jump in with their ignorant zeal and energy, throwing money all over the place, talking up a storm of all kinds of initiatives and projects and plans. But they have no real experienced plan to actually bring about the goals that they want to talk about. And they don't achieve those goals at all. In fact, they do very little that isn't already being done by existing schools, and much of the school culture is just endless starting up and never actually ever any achievement. But when I started the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, what I said is, what I'm going to do is devote all of my energy, all of my attention, all of my resources to building the soul of the school, to building the mind and identity of the school. And what I did was I began researching and learning all the details of the curriculum, what was needed, the goals, the objectives, the resources, the tasks, what assessment needs to consist of, what the goals should be and should not be. And I began building that system. And if you look at the Classical Liberal Arts Academy today, we've got a learning management system, which we call the Academy Study Center, that has over 100 courses spanning all levels of study, from preschool all the way through adult independent studies. The resources for study have all been found out and recovered and made accessible. So we have an established curriculum. We have very clear curriculum goals. The curriculum is clearly articulated on our website through our curriculum pages, course recommendation pages, and so on. And not only that, but we've got assessments for the entire curriculum. And this year we're publishing, in addition to written assessments we've used in the past, we're publishing quizzes and tests and exams that are going to create an entire system of curriculum-wide, school-wide assessment standards for all students. This is the kind of stuff that modern schools don't have. Instead of starting a school and then asking the teachers to make me a curriculum map, I decided to start with the curriculum and the curriculum map and go beyond that to the assessment and the standards of learning and build the entire mind or soul of the school and make that available. And it's now available. And there's nothing like it anywhere. Now, my advice for anyone interested in reforming an existing school or starting a school, and when I say start a school, don't think buildings and facilities, think tutoring, think teaching a small group of local students. Think of organizing, 10 by 10. Don't think hundreds, don't think facilities, don't think school buses full of, that's just all crazy modern public school stuff. Think small numbers. I often think to myself that Jesus, our Lord, had 12 disciples. We're talking about having hundreds of students, thousands. Our Lord had 12 disciples. So if we have a realistic view of high quality education that's actually sustainable, the numbers are much, much smaller than anything that modern schools talk about. But what I would recommend is that you build your local school around the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's Study Center. I can assure you that you will never get the work done that has been done to build the study center. You won't get it done, and I'll say this for a number of reasons. Not because I'm some extraordinary individual, but because in God's providence, I have had 24 years of time and opportunity to work on this, for which God has provided. I've invested 24 years to build the Academy Study Center. And for you to say, I'm going to start a school and start that process from scratch, it's just never going to happen. And even if it does happen, it will be an enormous Pyrrhic victory that will cost you far more than it will gain for you in the end. And the truth is, if you're interested in starting a classical Catholic school, the entire foundation of the school, which is not the faculty, it's not the facilities, the foundation of a school is the actual curriculum and mind of the school, the curriculum with assessments and standards and lessons and study materials. All of that is already prepared in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy Study Center. And if individuals or school boards would organize their schools around the Academy Study Center, using it as their lesson management system, they would have a treasure of resources for their students that no other schools have. And the actual work of managing the school locally, it would be a breeze. It would be very easy. There would be no dependence on faculty. A few people would be able to teach hundreds of students effectively. There would be very low tuition. It'd be affordable for everyone. And volunteers could actually have a very significant role in the school, not have a school that depends on all of these hired, unskilled workers that just create massive overhead and really don't accomplish anything. The key to starting a classical Catholic school, and I know it's maybe audacious for me to say this, but the key to start a successful classical Catholic school is going to be to build it around the Classical Liberal Arts Academy Study Center. To use the study center as your school curriculum, to use it for your study materials, to use it for your student records, to use it for your assessments, to use it for your grades, to use it as a source of support for students and parents. And in the local school, to only hire people, hire a small number, a very small number, a fraction of a modern school faculty, a fraction, just a few people who are experienced with the system and are able to help students use it, because that's really what the school is going to come down to. Anything that a school wants to add to the study center is all just icing on top of the cake. But the problem is most schools don't have the cake, and they're just giving the kids icing, really just a bunch of nonsense like junk food. So my advice is to save all of the time and money of trying to do what all of the other private schools are already doing with no success, just to do it all over again with all the same problems and all the same troubles. Rather than that, to start with the Classical Liberal Arts Academy Study Center as the infrastructure of your entire school culture, entire school program, and then build your local school around the study center. The cost for you to do this it's just ridiculous. Again, because in God's providence, I've been able to develop this over the course of 24 years. It cost me very little to actually operate and run it. I offer, for example, a school plan where for a simple monthly fee, for even a smaller annual fee, students can be enrolled as students in the Academy Study Center and have access to everything that's available in the study center. So once a student in your school is enrolled in our study center, you and them have access to everything in our study center. And that's true for every student enrolled in the school. It's true for every teacher in the school. And you can just see there's an unlimited source of academic resources, all of the quizzes, tests, exams, assignments, all of it already prepared and included. And then determining what your school is actually going to do leaves you free to focus on what schools should be focused on. Schools should not be focused on academic content or intellectual excellence, because it takes just a small number of people to do that work. What schools should really be focused on is community activity, culture, Catholic life together, and so on. That's really what local schools should be focused on. If there is money in the local school, it should be going to those sorts of things, not to paying teachers to pretend that they're some sort of curriculum designers when they're not, and they're free to come and go at any time. And just think of the long-term wastefulness of schools who invest so much money renting teachers for years and years and years, only to be left with nothing in the end. It's just such a foolish plan. So poorly conceived, not thought through, irresponsible, and it's why the schools are constantly poor. Imagining being able to take money received from parents and donors for your local school and invest it in the permanent life of the school rather than in teachers that come and go, or investing it in a small number of staff members who are, going to be there forever. Like people who live locally, who actually organize and develop the school, have their own children in the school, have no plans to go anywhere. Imagine the resources being able to go to them to allow them to serve the school community stably with resources to be able to actually make the culture beautiful for those children in the school, because the core substance of the school is already provided for. That's what is really needed for a successful, real classical Catholic school. And the core of it all, the foundation of it all, the most difficult and expensive part of all of it is already available if you'll use the Classical Liberal Arts Academy Study Center. So I want to put that in your ear. If you're an existing school administrator who just knows that the things aren't working, and changing the books or looking for new teachers, you know that's not going to fix the problems. They're deeper than that. They're bigger than that. And you know that there's something wrong. There's something you just can't fix. There's problems you can't overcome. And you're looking around and you're just at the end of your rope in terms of what could possibly be done. And I'd like you just to listen to me and understand that using our study center as your school curriculum will free your school from the troubles of modern private schools. I'd like to put that in your ear and have you start to chew on it and think about it. And I'd like you to get in touch with me so we can talk about the practical details of how things work. If you're an individual who is interested in education and you're thinking, I would love to start my own school. I mean, people did this in the past. I mean, John Bosco started his own school. He didn't have money. He wasn't wealthy. He was a poor priest. How are these priests, how are these missionaries through history able to start schools? And yet, when we think of starting a school today, we think of giant facilities and millions of dollars of fundraising. Is it possible for me to start a small school just with a dozen, 24 students that I help work with? How can I do that? The answer is to use the Academy Study Center. If we go back to the Jesuits, for example, back in the 1500s, the Jesuits didn't go out and start complicated large schools with large faculties and facilities. They started with Ratio Studiorum, which was the rule of studies. They had a very clear system of education that any individual Jesuit could take into any place and begin to offer to the people there. That's what's available in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, only it's 1,000,000 times more dynamic, more useful, more flexible than what the Jesuits had. And it's the latest technology. It's easily accessible. It costs next to nothing to use. It's available anywhere there's internet access. And what your school does with it, what you do with it, is really up to you. But it provides the foundation and then allows you to bring your own local needs and interests and personality to it and offer a great local school program. So if you're interested in that and you don't know how to go about getting started or how to go about reforming what already exists, I recommend that you just get in touch and we start to talk about it. It's December. I wouldn't recommend changing anything in the middle of the school year. So you've really got between now and next September to get things figured out and organized. And I think that's plenty of time. But if you're interested in developing a real classical Catholic school, not this fake nonsense where you just switch out some books and pretend that you've changed everything, but a real classical Catholic school, I recommend you get in touch because I'd be happy to talk about what needs to be done and how it can be done. And I'm willing to work with you. I'm willing to put my resources on the table and offer them to help you get started. But I'm going to leave it with you to reach out and ask for help. And I'm not going to do the work for you. If you're an individual who has no skill or ability or resources and no one interested in you being their teacher, I'm not going to build a school for you, obviously. I'm talking about people who are already working in schools, who are already teachers, already board members, already school administrators, people who know that they can start a school if they want to, if they haven't already been involved in a school. I'm willing to help you, and I can provide you with the resources that will allow you to do what I've described in this talk. So I recommend you get in touch. Write me an email. Don't call me. Write me an email, and just give me some background info, where you're at, what you're hoping to do, what your thoughts are for your local community, and give me the opportunity to talk about what you could do to make use of the Academy Study Center where you are and establish a successful classical Catholic school. So the ball's really in your court. Send me an email. Like I said, my email address is mail, M-A-I-L, mail@classicalliberalarts.com. Send me an email, introduce yourself, and we'll get the discussion started. But it's very easy to start an excellent Catholic school. It's very easy to develop and administer a classical Catholic school using the Academy Study Center. You don't need $1 million. You don't need 1,000 students. You don't need high tuition. It's very, very easy, but you've got to learn to think about this work differently, because thinking about it the way that all other private schools work doesn't work. If you're willing to think about it differently and start with a different approach, different structure, different model, different focus, different method, it can work. So I'm going to leave that with you. Again, invite you to write to me, mail@classicalliberalarts.com. I also would like to invite you to take advantage of a special offer I make, which is to have a guest account in the Academy Study Center. If you go to classicalliberalarts.com/guest, there should be a form there for you to fill out and request a guest account in the study center. You can start studying on your own at no cost. You can go in and look at everything that's there. And what I'd like you to do is use that guest account and think of your students, think of your teachers signing into that study center and having access to all of those resources. Think about how that would change your school community, your school life. Think of all of your students taking the same assessments, having a standardized test, not at the end of the year, but for every single lesson, every single year. Think of the standardization. Think of all the benefits. Think of the culture that would develop. Think of the meaningfulness of awards in your school community, where every group of students knows exactly what it takes to pass this lesson and complete this course. Think of how it builds real community, establishes real standards, real excellence, and so on. Get into the study center and think about your students' possible experience using it. And I think that will help you to start thinking through the practical details of what can be done. And like I said, it's very affordable to use. If you need financial help to get started, I'm happy to make some sort of a deal that will work for you to let you get started. But like I said, make use of the guest account, get in touch, introduce yourself, and I'd be happy to be a partner in helping you to start a classical Catholic school. God bless.